Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction and give you some heads up on a couple things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Morton to talk to us about Active Directory today. As always, this knowledge reinforcement session is being recorded. We'll post it on the community. If you have any problems finding it on the community or anything like that, just let us know. But you should be able to go to the community and search knowledge reinforcement, and you'll be able to find it, or even KRS, and you should be able to find it. A couple of things. I wanted to let you know that we have a few more knowledge reinforcement sessions coming up this year. The next one is going to be with Bob Clark, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about an overview of upgrading smart structure sites. So existing sites that are at a 1.6, 1.7, whatever, and talk about upgrading them to the latest revision and some of the considerations. Then we are also going to have a session with on Smart Structure Lite and an update on just with some information and some overview of some of the capabilities there. And then, and that's going to be Bob Dame is going to help lead that one with probably some other guest speakers like Ralph Beaudry or some other guest speakers. So that one's going to come up in October as well. And then we also are going to have one on security later in November, and that's going to be with Steve Turney and Pat McNally and probably Roger Bentley. So we've got a few more knowledge reinforcement sessions coming up this year. So stay tuned and keep on the lookout for those. One other thing I wanted to do, and this is going to be a little different from what we typically do on our knowledge reinforcement sessions, but we always appreciate feedback and insight, obviously, especially from those of you that attend. We recognize many of your names. So we're putting together kind of an IP networking curriculum, just kind of some foundational basics about, think about the people on your teams that might need some IP networking, foundational stuff, some basics, some nomenclature, some architecture, that type of thing. We're putting this together in preparation for 2.0 and our SmartX controllers, our MPXs. And so what I wanted to do is just solicit from you some input or any sort of recommendations of anything that you've seen. It can be a video, it can be a training, whatever, that you really appreciated or really thought was good with regards to IP networking basics. If you have time and you want to, in my learning link right now, there is a curriculum called hold on a second, I think it's called Network Fundamentals. So if you go into my learning link and you search network and you click the curriculum object, which is the little book, you'll actually see the curriculum for Network Fundamentals. It's two videos, or two online modules, one called Cable Basics and one called Introduction to IP Networks. And I'd love your feedback on that as well, because that's one of the ones that we're looking at right now. But so if you have ideas or suggestions or something that you just really, really liked with regards to IP networking basics, we don't always want to recreate the wheel. We'd like to use what you think is really good. So just send me a note. You can send it to me in chat, or you can send it to me via email, allison.sarter@schneiderelectric.com. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeff for about the next hour, and then we'll have Q&A throughout. And real quick, Jeff, just let me remind everybody, if you do need to ask a question, do *6, because we have the call in silent mode at this time. So if you press *6, that will unmute your phone, and then whenever you're done talking, if you will mute your phone again by pressing *6, that would be great. The other thing is that if you have questions, just simply type them into the chat, and Nicole and I can help facilitate those questions. And I think with that, Jeff Morton, I'm ready to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Allison. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's great. It's great to see the list of folks that are joining us today. A lot of friends from branches and from some great partners, and also glad to see we've got some great resources on the phone in the form of our NAM BMS Advanced Support Team and Global PSS. Glad to have you guys. Hopefully this will be a valuable session for you. I don't know how much experience you all have with integrating Active Directory with SBO systems, but it's a very powerful feature, and it's one that a lot of our customers are interested in, especially because they already typically have the burden of maintaining user lists and group memberships within Active Directory for Windows logins to manage access to file shares and stuff. And so since they're already doing that user administration function on the IT side, many customers appreciate the fact that the Smart Structure solution is capable of using those group memberships to dole out system permissions. So the idea is just by saying that someone is in the maintenance managers group, they can inherit their access permissions within SBO really cleanly and efficiently. And when someone changes roles, they just change it one place in Active Directory, and then the BMS is wise to it. So there are a few things in this presentation. We're going to show a few different architectures, also a few caveats. But let's kick it off with this first screen. So some benefits, as I mentioned, Active Directory integration gives us centralized management of user accounts to where Active Directory is the authority, and then SBO keys off of what's configured in Active Directory. It makes sure that when user accounts are created or deactivated within Active Directory, that the BMS also is wise to that it also recognizes new users or that a user should be deactivated or removed from the system. Of course, we've got some great password policy options within SBO, but Active Directory has even more password policy management features, and by taking advantage of the Active Directory tie-in, any password policy that Windows can enforce, you can get through SBO too. So, as I mentioned earlier too, by linking SBO user groups to Active Directory groups, you can automatically have users inherit permissions, which is incredibly powerful. I'll give a demo of that after this small slide deck, just like 7 or 8 slides. Just as a heads up, some limitations. First of all, we have an integration with Active Directory, but not with LDAP. So generic LDAP does not currently have support, just Active Directory. Also, you need to use groups to assign permissions when we have the Active Directory tie-in, because the whole power to it is users being in a group allows them to automatically inherit permissions. SBO doesn't know about all the Active Directory accounts that exist until a user logs in. So we can't actually assign permissions to individual users. We assign permissions to groups. But that shouldn't be a pain point for most customers. And the third caveat is you have to have an enterprise server in order to do the Active Directory tie-on, because it's using a service that runs on Windows. It's the service that runs the enterprise server. That is where we actually connect to the directory. So you have to have an enterprise server in your architecture in order to do Active Directory user authentication. But that doesn't mean that users have to sign into only the enterprise server. It just needs to be a piece of the architecture. So a prerequisite, and this is important, for folks that just install the enterprise server with the default local system account, this is usually not a big deal because local system almost always has adequate permissions to browse the Active Directory. But if you have one of those customers, and I know some of you do, if you have one of those customers that insists that a specific account be used to run the enterprise server and they lock down the permissions of that account, they have to ensure that that account has browse permissions for the Active Directory in order to use Active Directory-based authentication. they lock that account down to the point where it's not able to access AD, then this sign-on method is not going to be possible. So we've got two different ways to log into the system. Most of you guys are probably very familiar with these. You can log in with either Workstation or with WebStation. So Workstation, of course, is using our client that's installed on Windows. And then WebStation is logging in via browser. And that can be on Windows, or that can be another platform. That can be on mobile. Lots of options. So there's a distinction between the two. With Workstation, we're able to fetch the security identifier, or the SID, of the current Windows user. So long story short, what that means is that little checkbox that says login as, you can click that box, and then you don't have to type in a username or password, because Windows has already prompted the user for credentials, and so this just tells Windows to use the authenticated user to log into the system. So that's super convenient. Just because you're able to do that, though, doesn't mean you have to. So if you were logged into Windows with one user account, but then you needed to log into SBO with a different Active Directory account, you can. You just don't check that box, and you manually enter a username, password, and a domain. So once you've done that, it will allow you to log in as another user. So So this is the first time we're going to mention this, but we'll mention it a few times. It is very, very, very important that you use HTTPS for server-to-server communication on multi-server sites where you're relying on Active Directory integration. User credentials, when a user logs into an automation server, and we'll have some slides on this coming up soon, get sent from a child server to the enterprise server, and the enterprise server is where those credentials are validated. You must use HTTPS for that server-to-server communication to ensure those credentials are protected. If you're not using HTTPS, it's possible for someone to intercept those credentials. So it's a best practice to use HTTPS for server-to-server communication, but it's imperative that you use it on sites where Active Directory authentication isn't used. So in Workstation, as I mentioned, you have the choice to choose between selecting the security identifier, which is just the login as option, or manually entering credentials. With WebStation, we don't have the benefit of pulling the security identifier, so you just have to manually enter username, password, and domain. So that's probably enough detail there. So here's a picture of the login process when you just have an enterprise server and you're doing your Active Directory login. So when you use the security identifier, there is actually no need for communication between the SBO client and the Active Directory service interface. So this is where Workstation is able to directly validate the local logged-in user. So that's all contained within the server. It's very clean, very, very simple. And I'll demonstrate this. So something to note, when you're logging in from a different machine, so that last one is, say you're running like Workstation on the same computer's enterprise server. In this example, you're running, let's say, Workstation on a different machine or WebStation. When your SBO client is running on a different machine, when you authenticate, that connection between the SBO client and the enterprise server is always secure. So we use AES encryption to protect those credentials. So your client can be safe that their Active Directory credentials are protected. When you log in specifically as the current user using your SID with Workstation, we don't have to transmit that password over the network. So that is the most secure, which is just logging in as the current Windows user. But when you manually enter those credentials, that's when you have that the credential gets encrypted, and so it's well protected. All right, so extending the architecture a little bit. So this is when you're running Workstation or WebStation on another machine, logging directly into one of the ASPs in your system, or it could be an AS or an ASB. When you log in to that ASP or ASB, again, we've got the two scenarios. One is where you choose to use the SID, the security identifier, and of course no password is transmitted over the network, so that's safe. But when you're manually entering credentials, when you log in to that automation server, we do have encryption in place. That is secure. But for the stretch between that server and the enterprise server, this is where it's critical that you use HTTPS for server-to-server communication to ensure those credentials are protected. And we're pointing out here at the bottom of the slide, if you're not using HTTPS to protect that password transmission between servers, then you are responsible for clear text passwords being passed between those servers, and that is of course something we never want to do. There's a lot of liability there. So those are the architectures, both logging in to the enterprise server on the local machine, logging into the enterprise server from a remote machine, and then logging into a child server from a remote machine. So that was a very short and sweet slide deck, and now we're actually going to do some demos of what Active Directory authentication looks like and how user groups are set up and stuff. Get this guy out of the way. Let me bring up the good stuff. All right, so here I have got, you know what, let me make sure I've got this removed. I'm going to remove it because we want to start from scratch for you guys. You can see the whole process. Definitely want to delete that. Okay, so I'm on the Schneider Electric corporate network, and so I'm actually going to be using that Active Directory system for my authentication here. Right now I'm logged in as a local user. You can see down here I'm logged in as admin, which is the local user account that I'll be using to set this stuff up. But to give you a quick tour of my system, I've got two folders here. One is called Dashboard. Dashboard has a graphic with some stuff that we want all of our users to be able to see. But then there's a folder that's got sensitive stuff in it. Specifically, it's got the system shutdown point, and we don't want just anybody to have access to the sensitive stuff. So our mission is to use Active Directory to allow users to log into the system with the ability to see the appropriate folders. So first, I'm going to set myself up so that I can inherit general user permissions where I can only see the dashboard. And then I'm going to set myself up as someone that should be allowed to see the sensitive stuff too. So let's get this started. So I'm going to go ahead and under domains, I'm going to create a new domain. This is the heart of it. So like I can call this SENAM. And I have to provide the Windows domain name if I want this to be an Active Directory tie-in, which of course we do. And so the official name for this, and anyone that's a Schneider employee can also do this too, as long as you're running an enterprise server on the company network. So I can type in nam.gad.schneider.electric.com. And that looks great. So I've just told it I've created this new domain, and there's a specific Windows domain, Active Directory domain that I want it to be associated with. So now, like I mentioned earlier, the next step is just creating groups. So we need to make user groups. So I think the easiest way to do this might be from the control panel, account management, and then here you've got this domain selector. So now that we've made our Active Directory domain, I'm going to choose that. And then let's say we want to add a new group. I'll say add. And I'm going to call this all Dallas users. So I want everyone in the Dallas office to be able to log into this system and see that dashboard. Because the dashboard's really cool, and we want to promote visibility to that incredibly important data. So I'm not going to pick user accounts. No accounts exist yet in this domain. That's fine. Yeah, I'll give them the system default workspace. And this stuff, these are all the options you're familiar with standard groups. But now we've got the ability to specify the Windows group name. So this is the group from the Active Directory that we want to be associated with the group, the SBO group that we're creating right now. So I can click this. If I was really, really good, I could type in exactly what the group's named. I have no clue what it's named. So I'm going to click on this Browse button, which is actually going out via Active Directory and fetching the list of all the groups that are available. Takes a moment because we have a whole lot of groups within Schneider Electric. As you can see, there are, I think, a few gajillion. And so I'm going to, I'll just help myself out here by typing in part of it. I know the word Dallas is in here. All right, so that thins it down. And in fact, find it here. So here's TAC US America, Dallas, all users. Great, that's what I want. So I click Create. So we've got our user account created. It doesn't have permissions yet, so let's add some permissions. So we're just going to click Software Permissions, and let's say I want to give them read-only access to the whole server, but let's say that I want to forbid access to that sensitive stuff. I'm going to save this. This is the way that we've always been able to set up permissions. I could add the other permission here if I wanted to, but I want to show off our new friendlier user permission configuration we've got now with, I think, 1.9, maybe 1.8, but I think it's 1.9. So I can right-click on sensitive stuff, and then I can say Edit Permissions, and then let's say instead of inheriting, I want no permissions for all Dallas users on my sensitive stuff folder. So, of course, other administrators have access to it, but this Active Directory group, I've taken away their access to the sensitive stuff folder. So let's go ahead and try this out. I've got my dashboard folder and my sensitive stuff folder. I'm going to log out, and I'm going to use the super convenient checkbox here, log in as, so that I don't have a username or password that I have to type in. It just pulls my SID from Windows, and I click Login. So you'll see a couple things. First is that my system tree is gray, which means read-only, so I don't have read-write access, but I do have the ability to click on this and view this super important graphic that everyone needs to be able to see. So, this is good. We've got our first group accommodated. And by the way, I didn't create a user account for myself. I didn't make something for my Active Directory user account. It's just merely by my group membership that I inherited the ability to log into the system and to see this portion of the system tree. I'm going to log out because now I want to make my administrators. So I need to log in with an account that has adequate permission to do that. So now I'm logging in as local admin, but I want to set up, that's a great question. Someone chimed in with a good question, and I think the answer, I know the answer is yes, but I don't remember where it is. Ben asked if it's possible to disable HTTP logins altogether, and the answer is yes. I think it's a server security setting. I'm going to the control panel anyway, so I might as well just check that out. Here it is. So you can disable incoming HTTP communication, and then also if web station sessions try to connect with HTTP, you can force them over to HTTPS. So, Ben, hopefully that answers your question. But now I'm going to go back to the account management. So I've already got my group. Great. I've already got my group set up. I just need to switch to our Active Directory domain. Got my group for all users. But then let's say I want to add a group I'm going to call Training Admins. So if you've had a training instructor that's here, in fact, if you've had an instructor within our technical training organization, they are an admin of my system. I want them to be an admin. So I'm going to say, I don't know who those are. I'm not going to add any users, though. In fact, one of those was me, and one was someone else who's logged into my enterprise server while I've been giving this talk. I'm going to add a workspace, because we need a workspace. And then I'm going to pick a group here. And this one, I'm going to use TAC US AM Learning. I'll just start typing that, TAC US AM Learning. So this is everyone in our training department. This could be like the maintenance directors group or something. So we've got that set up. I'm going to click Create. And again, we go through the permissions granting process. So I'm just going to right-click on Server 1 and say Edit Permissions. And we've got the ability to add for our domain, training admins, add. So now it's here in the list, and I want our training administrators to have all access. So previously, I was just in the All Dallas Users group, and so I had read-only access to the whole system, except my access was blocked to the sensitive stuff folder. Now, since I'm in the training organization, I have full access to the whole server. And if we want to verify that on the sensitive stuff, we can edit permissions, and that should be inherited. And it is. Training admins is inherited. So because we haven't broken it, it's still there. So let's test it out. I'm going to go ahead and log off the system. And then I'm going to log in as me using my security identifier and click Login. Ta-da! So first, the system tree is in color, which means I have read-write access, and then I've got access to that sensitive stuff folder too. So hopefully this has given you guys a good example of how you can create groups within your domain. So, and by the way, this domain defaults to the domain of the user that's currently logged in. So that's why it's coming up as my Active Directory domain while I'm logged in as an Active Directory user. But we've got the ability to create groups here, assign permissions to these groups, and then any user that attempts to log in gets validated by Active Directory group membership. And if you really wanted to look at users, they come in by default with their GUIDs. But I think so let's see, if I click on training admins and I see which people, oh that's right, we don't have people explicitly added there. But if it was really important for me to associate this GUID with a username so that good names would be in event logs and stuff, you can actually rename these. So I could call this Jeff Morton. So that then within event logs, I show up as Jeff Morton or whatever. So it's probably a best practice so that it's user-friendly instead of just having GUIDs. But it's not essential that you do that rename in order for users to be able to log in.
Jeff, did the property show anything about that user?
Great question. Let's pull it out. No. Yeah, I don't think we pull it. But you can see their GUID from Windows, so you can make that association. But good question. Okay, so another question came in to me via chat. It's a great question. It was actually one I was planning on showing, but I got ahead of myself, so thank you for the reminder, Jonathan.
Jeff, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
Before you move on, can you just show again the HTTP disable part? Somebody was trying to take a screenshot and they were unable to get it.
Absolutely. It's under security settings. So if you click on Control Panel, and then under Security Settings, here you have the ability to disable incoming HTTP. Oh, and then that grays out the redirect. So it won't even redirect HTTP to HTTPS if it's disabled, because it won't even listen to HTTP. Alternatively, if you want to just redirect WebStation to go to HTTPS, you can check that. But this would definitely be the more secure of the two, where it just doesn't accept any HTTP connections. All right, so let's, I'm not going to save my changes there. Let's go ahead and do the manual login. So I've been showing you the one that I like the most because it's the most convenient. It's also the most secure because you're using Windows credentials. But we can manually type in, and before I show the manual process, the really nice thing about using this checkbox, if that's the standard process, we have some smart structure installations at some very high security facilities, some federal government facilities, some with requirements where users have smart cards to authenticate with Windows. When you have that multi-factor authentication requirement for Windows, if you have Active Directory integration, if that customer has a requirement for multi-factor authentication to control user access into the BMS, then just by instead of having just credentials, maybe it would satisfy them by saying that the policy is everyone is to log in with their SID, so that the expectation is a user can't log into Windows without those credentials. And so then by logging into Workstation, with that multi-factor authentication, so then when they try to log into Workstation, essentially that biometric or that smart card or whatever was used to log in here too, because it's inherited from Windows. Okay, so got a great question from someone that I'll answer here just before logging in manually. Claudio asked how you can add just yourself and not a whole group. That's the trick. You can't. You can either create a local user account for yourself that's not Active Directory, or you can create a new Active Directory group and just put one user inside of it. But we don't have a provision for granting permissions to single users via Active Directory interface. So it's all intended to be done on a group level. And that's actually a better management practice when you think about it, because when there's a specific user at a customer site, even if there's only one VP of finance, and you think, well, I just want to give permissions to that one VP of finance, realistically, 5 years down the road, there might be a different VP of finance. And if you use a group, even if the group only has a single user in it, it's probably a better practice. It's probably a better practice there to ensure that you're not trying to assign permissions to individuals and rather using the more flexible group process. So let's go ahead and do the manual login here, as Jonathan has requested. And I'll show you, because we have plenty of time. I'll do it both here in Workstation and I'll also do it in WebStation. So I need to log in with my Windows account. My Windows password. I think that's it. We'll find out. And my domain. Oh gosh, what did I call it? Called it NAM AD, I think. Let's try that. No, I didn't call it NAM AD. Let's see what I called it. SENAM. Okay, SENAM. All right, let's do that again. All right, so now I'm going to click Login. So again, I'm manually entering my Active Directory credentials, so the enterprise server is actually going to do the authentication for me. Oh, and I'm not remembering my correct password.
That's because you always choose like these really, really hard ones. Like every good security person should put.
In fact, let me see. SENAM is what I named it within SBO, but it might actually need to be the domain name for Windows. Let me try changing that. Okay, just to simplify things. Struggle is real, people. We're going to go here to domains, and I'm going to rename this to NAM, so that I take all the guesswork out of, because that way it's the same domain name within Active Directory as it is within SBO, just to keep things simple. So now I'm going to do it again. All right. Oh, the takeaway is I don't know my password. Okay. Let me try with WebStation just to change things up.
Do you have some place where it take a second to find it?
This is where it's biting me that I log in with my fingerprint.
Yeah, I know.
So let's go ahead to host. I'll just try this for the sake of completeness. All right. So I changed a few things. It's kind of a no-no in troubleshooting. You're only supposed to change one variable at a time, but for the sake of respecting you all's time, I went ahead and changed a few. So I was able to log in, manually entering credentials. I'll try same thing here now. 15610. And I'll try leaving it just nam. See if that does the trick. Okay, it might be that I just need my complete domain. All right, let's try that. Okay, so it must have been that my domain field just needed to be a little bit more complete. But hopefully, in seeing me have to work through that, hopefully that saves you guys the effort of having to figure that same thing out. So I gave the, I guess that's the fully qualified domain name for my login, rather than just and I'm not down with the lingo, but just the name of the domain itself. Instead, I gave the fully qualified domain. All right. So to use Active Directory with WebStation, you have to manually. Oh, and it disappeared on me. Let me pull up the chat over here. Okay, yes. Great question, Ken. That is exactly right. Ken asks, so to use Active Directory with WebStation, you have to manually type in the credentials. There is no checkbox like in Workstation. That's correct. Because with WebStation, we don't have the ability to pull a security identifier from a Windows machine. Because web pages don't have the same level of trust on a machine, and also because it could be running on a non-Windows machine or even on a mobile machine, or a mobile device. So that's correct. Workstation is the only way that you have that super convenient checkbox. If you're trying to log in via WebStation, you're right, you will have to manually type credentials.
Hey, Jeff, I have a question. Are there any plans to integrate LDAP? If so, what's the time frame?
That's a really good question, because there are other folks that would be interested in integrating with LDAP that's not Active Directory. Active Directory is definitely the biggest authentication resource for our customers' Windows networks, but so that's the one that R&D went after. I am not aware of where the feature request for generic LDAP integration falls in our enhancement list, but we could definitely ask one of the product managers and maybe post it. I don't know, Allison. Would it be best to maybe post it as a comment when we upload this KRS video?
Yep, I think that's a good idea. Mm-hmm.
Great. So yeah, we can research that for you. Okay, so Jonathan, you're asking if you can use the domain controller IP address instead for login. Probably not. So I'm guessing you're asking about putting in your Active Directory domain controller here. The issue is, and you're exactly right, the domain controller is part of the login process, but this is specifying the address of the SBO server that you're wanting to log into. And so we wouldn't actually be able to use Workstation to log into a smart structure system unless you happen to have your enterprise server running on your domain controller. So I'd probably just leave this as the IP address of your enterprise server or the IP address of the automation server that you wish to log into. Good question. Oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry, I misinterpreted. Jonathan, your question's a good one. Let's try it. For the sake of science, we're all technical, comfortable people here. So,
but just so everybody knows, just reading from the chat, that's where the questions are coming from.
Yes. So the question that came in that Jonathan has asked is if in the domain field we could put the IP address of the domain controller. So let's give it a try. Let's test it out. Sorry, Allison, I'm kind of going a little bit of success with smart structure flavor here. But if I ping nam.gad.schneider-electric.com, that resolves to an IP address. So it's 10.173.101.139. Let's give that a try. I don't know if it's going to work. It's worth testing, though.
I think this is great, Jeff. I think it's absolutely perfect.
All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, and that IP again was 10.173.101.139. So I'm using my Active Directory credentials. Instead of using the domain name for the Active Directory domain, I'm just giving an IP address. Try that. Oh. So let's try the same thing and move it back to the name of that AD. m.gad. All right, we have our answer. You do have to provide the name of the domain rather than an IP address. That's good. Now we know.
Did you see John's comment too, Jeff, about the online help and what it specified?
John's comment. Online help does say not to name an SBO domain with the same name as any Windows domain name. Okay, that's good to know. So maybe what I had originally done was a best practice. Let's try reverting back. Instead of NAM, I'm going to rename this to SE NAM so that it is different than my Active Directory name. So I'll log in again. And it works. That's great. Yeah, that certainly, if their names are different, then there's no confusion about which one you're typing into that field. We definitely want to type in the actual Active Directory domain name into that field rather than the SBO domain name. So, do we have any other questions? Anything you're wondering if it works or how to do it, or questions about implementation?
Jeff, did you see the one that just came in? Oh,
yeah, a couple are coming in. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, is there a way to get username from the GUID? Let me do a quick web search. German GUID of AD user. All right, let's just it's a little bit dangerous browsing the web, unknown pages. Let's look at TechNet article. That sounds good. Oh, PowerShell scripts. Yeah, that's me. We'll try that one. Great. Okay, so there is a PowerShell module that specifically allows you to get the GUID based on a username. Here's another way you can do it in PowerShell. So hopefully that helps. PowerShell is not that hard to install. There might be easier ways too, but just in our simplified Google session here, let's see if superuser.com has a good answer. Oh, this is even easier. Do advanced features. I like how the last step is profit. Okay, so let's actually do this because we have a couple minutes left. I will manage my computer. Now, granted, I don't have. I'm not running on a domain controller. I'm running on a Windows machine. But let's see if we have this on local users. So, like right here, I've got my local administrator. So we'll try properties. No, it's not through this window. Okay, I might need to be doing this on a machine that actually is browsing the AD. But this looks like a pretty simple walkthrough. So with Active Directory users and computers, we can click View Advanced Features, and then you can open the properties of a user, Attribute Editor tab, and then Object SID is going to be the GUID. So hopefully that helps.
So Jeff, going back to LDAP, which is a product enhancement, but would LDAP fix and assist with web station login?
I would expect web station login to be the same if LDAP was implemented. Good question, though. So I'm guessing where that question is going is, would there be a checkbox in web station if LDAP is in use? I don't think so, because web station's got to be it's got to be served the same. At least historically, it's been served the same whether you're running Chrome on Windows or Chrome on your Android device. And so I'm guessing that there would not be a login as currently authenticated user checkbox in web station. But it might be possible. If that's a feature that could land tremendous additional work, it should definitely be put in as an enhancement request, because it'd be good for product management to know about that.
Okay, and then just a general question. I'm not sure where it would be pertaining to your presentation, but does this mean that IT people can add users to SBO?
Yeah, that is a great question. And the answer is essentially yes. So because user accounts don't get added to SBO when you're using Active Directory, you saw I never created a user account for myself, and I never created a user account for the one other person that logged in to my machine during this demo. If I look here under domains and SENAM and users, oh, 2 other people logged in. Great. So I hope you guys enjoy the dashboard, unless you're in the training group, and then you could actually delete stuff. So I didn't create these users. You're exactly right. The IT department creates Active Directory users, adds them to groups, and then by their mere membership in those groups, those user accounts get automatically created in SBO upon first login? Very good question. And then there's a great question through the chat on WebEx. How do email notifications work with these AD users? Will SBO be able to grab email addresses from AD? I don't know. I haven't tested that. That would be something. I'm afraid we don't have enough time to test it now, but that'll be another thing. I'm going to add it to my action list here, and we'll post that when we upload the recording. So the first one we were going to check into is time frame or priority for LDAP integration, generic LDAP. And then the next is email notifications, where you specify user accounts. Can it use AD emails? That is a very good question. Hey. So I got another question from Steve, and it is a good question. I can see this being a valuable feature. So he asks, is there any plan to pull the username? So this is the Active Directory user account name into Struxureware versus just using the GUID. This would be much more useful for auditing with new users. So that's a good question. I agree that would provide value. It would be nice if you didn't have to manually change names, if you didn't have to manually rename these from the GUID to a friendly name, either the first name, last name, or the user account name. I will also put that in my list of questions to ask product management. AD users created with friendly names. Oh, fantastic! So it's nice. This is a great networking opportunity. So that request came in, and then I've got multiple experts within our support team, both at our country level and at the global level, saying that this has been logged as an enhancement request. So that's already been documented as a feature that is desired, and so hopefully R&D will be able to incorporate that in an upcoming release. So thanks very much, Al and Shannon, on that.
All right. Are there any more questions? Nicole, you good?
No, I'm all set on my end.
All right.
Oh,
well,
and,
Jeff?
and
yeah?
there's one last thing here. So Barry
okay.
comments that the SBO log, SBO event log and alarm log automatically change to the friendly name from the GUID. So let's try that out. So if I look at my event view to see who's logged in. Oh, hey, there you go. Hey, that's not too bad. So it does have the friendly domain names. So here we go. There's a couple people that have tried to log in. Here's one in particular, and this is actually a friendly error message. I really appreciate friendly error messages. So you can see instead of the GUID, it's showing the username is someone else's CISA number within Schneider Electric. We could go to the directory and see who it is, but It's someone else who, during our session, has attempted to log into my enterprise server, but they're not a Dallas user, so they don't have that read-only permission, and they're not in the training department, so they don't have the full access. So it denied login, and it said user not associated with the group. So we only have this finite list of groups defined from Active Directory. Any Active Directory groups that we haven't associated with SBO groups aren't used to give permissions within SBO. So this person probably is in multiple Active Directory groups, but since none of them are defined as granting SBO permissions, they're denied login. So yeah, that's actually a great point. So we can see the friendly Active Directory names. Now, unfortunately, at Schneider Electric, our user accounts are not super friendly. They're CISA numbers, but most other organizations have first name, last initial, first initial, last name, that sort of convention for usernames. So yeah, this is a much more user-friendly way to see who is accessing the system. And then it said that the same is true for alarms. So if we created an alarm and a user acknowledged it, let's see, I'm logged in as me right now. If I caused an alarm, well, we don't have one right now, but if I caused an alarm and I acknowledged it, it sounds like we could also expect to see acknowledged by. You know, let's do that. Let's do that real quick. I'm just going to create a new alarm, and I'll call this out of range alarm, and we'll make this really easy. The upper limit is going to be -100 or -111. Lower limit is -112. And I'm going to attach it to something that will be in alarm right away. All right. That's fine with no time delay. All right, let's create that alarm. All right, so we are in alarm, people. Now I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that. I am not logged in as the admin. I'm logged in as SCSA 115610, and that's another place you can see that it's resolving to a friendly domain name. So that's nice. So I acknowledge it, and yeah, what do you know, Barry? Great observation, and that's helpful to everybody. So it does show my friendly AD name here instead of that unique identifier. So thanks.
All right. Anything else, Jeff? Did you get anything else?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and really nice job, Jeff. And guys and ladies, we've recorded this, and we'll be posting it on the community. Again, if you search KRS, you should see a list of the KRSs come up. And again, if you have any sort of IP videos or books or anything, I know I said books, I can't believe it, anything like that you'd like to recommend for an IP curriculum or IP courses, let us know. And with that, it's a wrap. Thanks a lot, everybody.